Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the API for Data Specification webinar. My name is Amy Lawpable, and I work on the communications team for the Rec Code Manager. I will be facilitating today's session. I have joining me today colleagues from across the Code Manager. We have Roz and Dec who will be speaking. Just a few bits of housekeeping to go through. This session is being recorded, and the recording and slides for the event will be made available on the Rec portal later this week. If everyone could keep their microphones and cameras off and less speaking, it would be greatly appreciated, just to minimize distractions. To take your questions today, we are using Slido, and you can access this via the details on the screen. If you have a smartphone, you can scan the QR code with your camera app to access Slido, or you can type the number on screen into slido.com on your web browser. Alternatively, if you're using the desktop app for Teams, you'll be able to see an S at the top of the screen where you can click and access Slido that way. We will have a designated Q&A section, but please feel free to raise your questions as they come to you throughout the session. And we will also have an interactive feedback section as well, where our presenters will be asking you questions. So feel free to submit any answers that you have through Slido that way, or just unmute yourself at that section. So I will now pass over to Roz to take us through the agenda for today. Thanks, Roz.
Good morning all, thanks Amy. So for today's agenda, we're going to start by talking about a vision that we have for implementing an API for communicating with the Rec data spec, and then provide a demonstration of that. And then we're going to ask for your feedback. What do you think of what we're proposing? Tell us, does it meet your needs? Is it what you'd like to see? Is there anything else we should be considering? And then we'll close with a summary of next steps. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Dec now.
Thank you. We skip to the next slide, please, straight away. So to kind of kick off, we'll just kind of go through what an API is to start with. So at the very most basic level, it's just a way of two computers talking to each other. The example that we've got there, if you are trying to get an Uber, you have your phone, a computer, and then that will send an API request to Uber, who will then send you back information about where the nearest riders are. So we're really trying to build this way of our systems talking to all of your systems in a much more concise way, instead of having to use the access databases and all of the various different ways that we're pushing out those data spec updates. Next slide, please. So the vision as a whole is to essentially create this real-time message creation. So instead of having to constantly keep updating the data specs that you will store, it'll send off a request to ours, to our API, which will then send back the structure of the message, making it easier to fill out. So there will be no need to store or update any of the databases on release, and the pre-releases will all be available through that anyway. So at the bottom, the kind of little diagrams are there. Rec users, all of you on the left-hand side, our system on the right-hand side, and this API will just be a way for those to communicate without needing the pre-release documents or any of the database updates. So the APIs themselves will send over in JSON, and it's essentially just a language that computers can read, computers can understand, and then that will get displayed in a more human readable format. Next slide again, please. I think this is actually the demo. Oh no, I've skipped one ahead. So yeah, there, sorry. So currently this is just kind of to show how across each of the pre-releases, all of the various different formats that we share the information in. So we've currently got the DTC data specification in the access database format, the complete rec access database, the HTML data specification, and the pre-release notes. So all of them coming in currently as part of the pre-release. Then as we get to the release, and upon the release, we have the DTC and the rec access databases. We update the legal text across the IBM platform and across the digital navigator. We have the HTML data specification as well, and then the release notes. So the only kind of change that we're looking to add to this is to bring in the API, which will get the API upon release, and as part of the pre-release as well. So you'll get an additional way of viewing it from your systems. Please. I'll just quickly share. So this is just going to look like a lot, and it is, but this is purely kind of a way for the computer systems to talk in the background. This isn't what you would get displayed. So the kind of three examples that I've pulled out are one that will share the market message information, one that will share the scenario variant information, and then another where you could pass over the supplier type or the party type that you are, and it will return all the different scenario variants which your party is included in. So I think it's probably easier if I show on the digital navigator what it'll look like, but I will flip between what the actual message that would come back would look like too. So this is the first one. So this is just the market message information that will get returned. So everything on this page would get returned if you were to hit the market message API. So you'd get the basic information about the message, so the name, the IDs, all of the local catalog references, what data items are contained in the message, and what scenario variants that message has. Then the second step from that would be to then call the scenario variant API. So once you know specifically which scenario variant you're looking for, it would look like this, but obviously it's not great to read. So you would have, again, the basic scenario variant information. So all of your IDs, descriptions, names, owners, the from and to party, and then the structure, which is kind of the part where you'd all be actually interested in. This is then where you're going to be able to build your message from. And then, like I said, this would come back in this format, which is the JSON, and essentially help you to build your message that way. So instead of having to store all of this information, you would just be able to call this URL, which would return all of this information. And then the third and final one, so as part of the digital navigator, we have this searching. So you can search for a specific party type. So here I'm searching for electricity supplier, and it's returning all of the scenario variants where the electricity supplier is either the source of the message or the target for the message. Then you would get this list of scenario variants coming back as one. So then you could go back and search for the specific scenario variant and get all of that previous information that we just showed here, like the structure. I think that's kind of the vision for a few of them. It's not necessarily that will be an exhaustive list of the ones that we would choose if we were to go forward, but I think that just gives a little flavor of kind of what you could expect to get returned if we were to progress with this. Amy, can I hand back screen to you?
No problem, just let me get the slides back up.
Thank you. So I know it was a real kind of whistle-stop tour of everything, but we've kind of got a selection of different questions that we just want to ask. So you can either put answers into Slido, just unmute and speak, or however you fancy giving the feedback.
Just before we go on to this section, Dex, sorry, there are a couple of questions that have come in via Slido on the last section. Oh, okay. Would you like me to ask those now? Yeah. So the first one, does this cover the gas flows covered by Reco? Yeah, it would cover everything that we currently publish in the data specification. So any of the messages that are currently in there will be passed out. Thank you. And then next one, will this include the number of valid values per data item? So currently, the three that I shared are just examples. If we were to be taking this forward, we'd obviously be getting more feedback on specifically what you would want to be returned. So we could, at this point, we could return anything currently that we currently hold as part of the data specification. So yes, it could if it was to get taken forward.
Sorry, the question was the enum values. So at the moment, you if you go to the Electrolink website, you have the DTC flows, don't you? And then you can go into the data items, and then it will give you the valid values according to MDD and all the other lookups. Would you be returning the data items with the valid values?
Yeah, so we currently display all of them on the digital navigator for the data items that have it. So anything that is on the digital navigator currently for the data specification, we'd be able to show, and anything else that you would be interested in that we hold for the data spec, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, next question. Will this JSON follow a similar or ideally same structure as the upcoming MHHS JSON messages?
So currently, as this is kind of just an example of what we could do, the actual design work hasn't necessarily been done. So we could definitely look into that if we were to take this forward, yeah.
Thanks, Deck. Next one, will this be included in the rec changes as part of a new change when you are asking people to impact assess changes or respond to consultations?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Will this be included in the rec changes as part of a new change when you are asking people to impact assess changes or respond to consultations?
So is that question as in if we were to implement the API, would the API itself be a change request?
Or I think it might be asking, would we give people the change details via the API? Is that the correct interpretation?
Who asked the question?
It says anonymous, but whoever asked the question, please feel free to unmute yourself and provide any clarification.
They're probably desperately trying to get off mute. The question for me, I've thumbs up it because I agree, and it's one I want to ask as well. It's about future changes. So a future change comes in, something's proposed, it's going through the consultation stage, and we're being asked to impact assess that change. Will you make the change available as a future version via the API so that we can review it?
I think normally. Oh, sorry, Nick, do you want to go?
No, Roz, you go.
So normally when we're consulting on changes, we don't update the data spec in the digital navigator at that point. We wait until everything's been approved and we know exactly what will be implemented. So changes tend to go out as redlined legal text. So in theory, we could update the navigator and then put it out, but then if it's not approved or if it changes between what's sent out for consultation and approval, that we then have streams of within the digital navigator that were things that weren't taken forward. So
effectively a draft specification. It makes it easy then, or easier, when we're trying to impact assess it or potentially even put it through our test systems if we've got a single place that we can obtain the data from. That's sort of the use case, at least from my point of view.
Not to use the same answer to every question, but once we got to the design phase, if this is to go forward, I think it's something that we'd have to talk about then, and impact assess on our side for how we'd be able to implement that. But it'd definitely be something that we could discuss.
Brilliant, thank you.
I'm
sorry, Roz.
So I was going to say, so if this is taken forward, if we get the feedback that supports it, the next step would be to raise a rec CP so that can be done very visibly and consult with the industry on what they would like. So there would be opportunity then to feed in what specifically do you want the solution to look like, and these are all areas that we can take forward through that process.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to just say that this is to kind of just get an idea of if you'd be interested in an API getting created, and then going forward, we'd be doing the design work and actually showing you kind of what exactly we'd be showing you, and showing all of that design work through the CP.
By going forward with the, sorry, I've not put it on Slido, so if you want to carry on your Slido questions, but I've got
Oh, no, you don't have to, you can speak as well. You don't
sorry, I don't want to derail it. If we were to go down the route of having this API, obviously that puts the onus on the suppliers making a front end to consume that JSON and present it in a way that's useful to that organization. Would this take any focus off enhancements to the RecCo portal? Because obviously when it went live, the way that it was displaying the data took in my mind, a step back. It wasn't displayed as well as the sources that it replaced, such as the DTN on the Rasco website. Does this take away from that desire to develop that? And will the answer be, you've got the information now in JSON, you do it, suppliers?
I think we've currently kind of got a couple of things in the work for the digital navigator that we're trying to progress to give you that visibility from our side. So I don't think it'd take over from us making any changes on that side of things.
So it's an additional tool rather than a replacement for any sort of future enhancement plans you have. Okay, thank you.
Yes, it would be. I probably skipped over it a little quick, but the slide where I was showing all of the kind of various formats that we put things in, it's in addition to all of that. It's not instead of any of them.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Is there any more Slido questions?
Yep, just one more. So will you present the different versions of the messages, for example, prior, current, future?
Yes. To shortly answer the question. So as part of the current build for the API that we were just showing and kind of testing, you would be able to pass in a version number. So that would be a rec version number, and then that would return for that specific version whatever the message was at that point in time. So that could be going forward for the pre-release. You would just add whatever the pre-release version is going to be called as the version number.
Thanks, Dirk.
Will the items still be searchable via the API, or is the intention that they be searchable via their legacy names as well? So, D379 as opposed to the variant.
Yeah. So I don't want to take back the screen, but that currently would work. So you could search the D number, the J number, or any of the legacy IDs currently, similar to how you would search on the digital navigator. In the search box that you've got on there, so you could search by any of the kind of known IDs.
And would the intention be that the digital navigator is based off the API data, so that we've got one consistent view?
The first two of the APIs that I showed, so the market message and the scenario variant, are exactly what we're using in the digital navigator currently.
So you're just looking to expose that externally?
Yeah.
Cool.
Any more?
Yeah, we've had one other come in. So if this is progressed to development, do you have an idea on implementation timescales? For example, Q1, 2 or 3?
Currently, I don't think we've put a timescale on it. It would really need a lot of the upfront work, so gathering a lot of the requirements to start with, so working out exactly what you would want to be displayed, and what you would potentially want as kind of future improvements for that, before I think we could put a timescale on it. But likelihood, as an absolute ballpark figure, as a 6-month development kind of window for it. But that is really ballpark.
Thanks, Dirk. That's it for Slido questions at the moment. So I think we can move on.
Yes, we've just got kind of a list of questions. These questions aren't signing up for anything if you answer it. We just kind of wanted to get a feel for what you're all thinking. So I don't know whether you can either reply on Slido, reply in chat, or unmute yourself and just chat. But in the near time, so say within the next 6 months, do you think your organization would be interested in the proposed API for the data specification?
you set Slido polls up for these?
No, we haven't got polls set up for these. It's just more of an open-ended. If you have any answers that you want to give, feel free to either submit them via Slido or you can just unmute yourself and speak.
If we put it the other way, it's if we were to say, do you think your organisation wouldn't make use of them if they were implemented? Did anyone say that?
We've had a response come in through Slido. So although helpful, it would not be high on our requirements due to the amount of change currently ongoing, rebate schemes, caps, market-wide half hourly.
Do we have any other opinions on that?
So if we were to look a bit further into the future, so the next question, say in around a year, would that make a difference, or would it still be relatively low priority relative to other things that are happening?
I think it's really difficult to say, isn't it, based on the amount of change that we've got on and the instability in the market, as it were. This doesn't feel like it's taken a tool away from us. It's giving us something that we could make use of. We don't necessarily have to systemize it either. You know, a JSON viewer would allow us to view this if you were to publish just the JSON documents, even if you didn't have an API. There's low dev ways of consuming this information, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that was kind of our idea behind it. It gives you just another way, and it gives you a bit more freedom behind the way that you want to ingest it. So whether you wanted it as just a JSON viewer, or whether you wanted to kind of build a front end that would consume that data, it just opens up the floor to kind of however you want to view it, instead of the ways that we are presenting it currently. I think the next question kind of touches on what we're already saying.
Sorry, we've so Peter Stiles has submitted a response through Slido for the second question. As this is a different way of doing what we already do, this wouldn't help us shorter term, provided you don't remove the other ways we can get this info.
That's useful to know. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, the next question kind of touches on what we were mentioning before. So are there any other rec services which you would be interested in providing via an API format? So the examples, the change proposals or the gas meter product data, or any others that you can think of.
I think there's certainly a case to be made for presenting those data items, maybe not in the current way they're being presented, so number of downloadable spreadsheets, different tabs on the rec co. API would be consistent, but I think there's probably work you could do in the short term that isn't quite as involved to try and tidy those things up and get them in a more consistent format.
No, that's good feedback. Thank you.
I think ultimately, though, if everything was available via a API lookup service, that would make sense in the long term. You said earlier, though, it got me a bit worried. As you said, there's a selection of flows. In my mind, for it to be useful, it'd have to be all of them or none of them.
I was meaning everything that is part of the data specification currently.
Fine, right, okay, makes sense.
It's probably me just misspeaking. But yeah, so it would be everything that is currently displayed on the digital navigator. So your pre-release information, your post-release information, and then future changes, hopefully. So kind of
gas product data would be a tick from me then. From Ian.
Okay, that's good. So the next question, kind of taken away from the APIs, just a bit more general questions around the structures that we give you the data in to start with. So currently, does your organization use the REC Data Specification Access Database? So not the DTC one, the complete REC Access Database that we share.
No.
Anyone else? Does anyone use it?
I think the choice of access as well assumes that the organization uses Office 365 and Microsoft products, and not all organizations do, including our own.
However, it is the lowest common denominator when it comes to database formats. And depending on database formats is one of the easiest ones to get a license to read, or does not need a license to read.
Any other opinions on it?
I think just to make some comment on the question of, does your organization use the REC Data Specification? Company I represent does not. We exclusively use the DTC Access Database purely because we have systems that can consume that and have done for such a long time that we haven't found a need to switch over to the new REC Data Specification. Because of the way that our systems are structured, an API into the REC Data Specification, again, wouldn't really be of much use to us because that's just not the way that our systems are set up. We are going to be making some changes for the future with a lot of the market-wide half-hourly stuff. It was me before actually who asked the question about the potential structure of the JSON that would be used to define the REC Data Specification. From a development perspective, if we could interpret the schemas for the JSON messages and also the JSON for the market messages in an almost identical way, that would probably be a good turning point for at least us, if not other parties, to transition from the DTC specification to the actual REC Data Specification, because you could theoretically have one interpreter that can consume. Yeah, exactly.
No,
that'd be a
really
big turning
helpful.
point for
Thank
us,
you.
I think.
Unless anyone else has anything else, I'll move on to the next one. So if the REC Data Specification was provided in a SQL database format, would you support the removal of the Access Database? So this is the REC Access Database, not the DTC Access Database.
Would anyone object to its removal?
I think if you were going to remove it, you'd have to do an impact assessment to all parties. It wouldn't be fair to make a decision based on however many of us there are here today.
Yeah, I don't think any decisions are going to be made kind of coming off these questions. We just wanted to get a feel for the group that we have here before kind of putting it out to the wider parties.
Yeah, and potentially do it through a change CP so that there's a governance process in place and it's really clear what will be provided and what wouldn't be provided. An opportunity for parties to consult on that and vote.
And the last one for this page, does anyone's organization currently use the HTML REC Data Specification that we provide?
Yeah. I'm a bit worried that this email, maybe, I don't know if it's something to agenda, but when this invite's gone out, I think there's only three people so far that have done any speaking. There's quite a few on the call. I'm wondering if we haven't maybe got the right types of people. I don't know if it's contract managers are on here, on the technical leads. Doesn't seem to be as much chatter as I thought there would be.
All right then, on that point, so I mean, I work as a developer for my organization. I know that the EMAR portal is used as a means to check the DTC access definition. So for example, if there are new flows introduced, we consume the access database for the DTC, as I've already mentioned, but as a means to check that our output that we create off the back of that matches it. I know that the EMAR portal is used as a reference point.
Okay.
So, you know, in the past we have found maybe the odd, just maybe even a typo discrepancy between the two. And we have, you know, we've messaged in those instances, but I can at least say that the HTML data specification, because I'm assuming it's the same data set that's behind EMAR, is used as part of our engineering process.
Yeah, so all of the various different formats that we provide it in are all based off the same data. It is just purely different ways that we've been doing it. So specifically the HTML version, that came about in kind of the transition between the IBM way that we were showing it and the digital navigator way that we now show it. It was kind of a middle ground between them. So I think the reason for this question was because we have the digital navigator, which is essentially a website which you can view. Is the HTML version needed, or are you able to use the digital navigator that we've put out?
We have also had someone comment anonymously on Slido saying that they use the HTML rec data specification too.
A question that's not on here, but do people know about the digital navigator? Do you use the digital navigator?
I was just going to say, actually, I didn't know that digital navigator existed until this call.
I think we need to look at how we promote that, because we have been putting out bulletin articles, but maybe we need to do a bit more to get visibility of that to people. But if you go to the IBM Jazz side of EMAR, and there's a button that says Digital Navigator at the top next to the dashboard, and that will take you to a new website. Oh, that's just popped a link.
I've also put a link in the chat.
So it's the same information as in the current EMAR IBM Jazz side, but we've created a different look to it that should be simpler and easier to use, and you can filter by, from, and to senders for data flows.
What channels have been promoted, used to promote that then?
Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say we've had a couple of calls about it, and I think we've put it in newsletters as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ross.
Yes, we have. I'll do another newsletter article on it as well, and have a look if there's anything else we can do to reach people who aren't on that distribution list.
I think just to reiterate as well, all of the actual information that's displayed across all of the various kind of formats that we display it is the same base data. It's just we've been trying to find different ways to make it more helpful. I think that's what this call is. Could we skip to the next page, please? So this, based off the last question, so if we were to provide the rec data specification in a SQL database format, would you support the removal of the HTML specification? So I think we could probably do to promote a little bit more the digital navigator, and then this question might be a little bit more relevant if you're just using that to check. I think Alex, was it you that we were saying you use it?
We use the I think you describe it as the Jazz, was it, format, the old one?
Yes. Okay.
I wasn't aware, and I've just checked with our contract manager. I don't think they were aware either of the new version. It is better, so it's definitely a step in the right direction.
I'm going to take an action away to look at what else we can do to promote that new version and get visibility of that out there.
So I'll just move on to the last question. So this is kind of as much feedback as possible. How far in advance of each of the go live dates do you require the pre-release data specification to be available from? So what pre-release lead time do you need for each of your organizations?
We've had a comment come in via Slido from Peter Stiles saying minimum 3 months.
Do we have any advances on 3 months?
I mean, it's really just as soon as possible. Back in sort of the old world, we'd have sort of 3 DTC releases a year. I think it would be what, February, June, November, off the top of my head. And for us, again, from development perspective, after one's been successfully implemented, the faster we can start working on the next one. You know, any new market message data flow definitions that need to be defined, any new processes that need to be built for us. You know, we could do with those data specifications, you know, ASAP really, because then we can start development ready for the next one. So yeah, I suppose 3 to 4 months is kind of ideal.
Okay, thank you.
Also, some idea of whether the future versions are proposed or finalized versions. Often in the DTC world, we'd get a succession of 2 or 3 versions of the final spreadsheet, final access database before it was fixed in stone.
I think I'd second that as well. A concept of a draft would be really useful. Historically, we've had the changes come through and you would have a draft of the file format in a PDF or whatever. It'd be great if we could align to have a consistent approach to that, so that when they're proposed, even in that consultation and design phase, if there was a concept of a draft that we could download, maybe version draft as well.
Yeah, I'm going to add a third on that one. I would, again, from a development perspective, much rather have a draft, even if it's like, well, you know, we're umming and ahhing on 2 or 3 aspects, but if we have that, you know, and can do 90% of it, and then make 2 or 3 tweaks because something else has yet to be finalized or agreed upon, that's much easier than waiting for something to be finalized later on down the line and then starting from that point onwards.
So you'd rather have it during the CP phase before it's gone for voting, even though it might change?
As long as it's marked as subject to change, sure, yes.
But only for the DTC changes. So anything, say, to the gas changes that aren't in that access database wouldn't be.
I mean, personally, I'd also be happy to receive any proposed gas changes, just because my line of work takes me into both industries. But certainly with the DTC stuff, for sure.
The gas...
Sorry, go on. No, no. You...
Gas ones, which format would you be looking for?
I mean, I know gas is kind of done differently with you guys. I mean, for me, in an ideal world, I'd probably have an access DB to, or ADB to consume as well. But just simply having like a PDF or a Word document of proposed changes to existing flow definitions or brand new flows yet to be introduced, just something to go off, whether it's human readable or machine readable.
So because we've got the full rec access database, that would be that machine readable one at the moment. So I'm just writing notes on this. Okay, so that's an action for us to look at what information we make available before approval of CPs as well.
I think the goal we're trying to all move towards at some point, isn't it, is to have consistency and it be sort of fuel agnostic, gas or electric, the same kind of mechanism for all, and move away from, maybe not yet, but move away from this distinction of DTC as being this separate and different thing. At the end of the day, it's a format, as the same as any other format, and we need to think about how we align both of those fuels and other fuels in future.
Yeah, I think for the moment we're committing to not retiring the access database that has the DTC flows, because it sounds like a lot of parties have built systems that rely on that. But it does make it harder to then bring that unity when we're still maintaining the separate version as well.
If your separate version can include all the data items that are in the DTC, then we can work on ways to migrate from the DTC to the new format. But when I looked at it originally, there wasn't possibility of locating all the DTC data items in there. I'm willing to be told I'm wrong as it stands now, but
there certainly wasn't a compelling case in my mind to move away from the existing known formats that worked, and there were gaps.
Yeah, there are things in the DTC one. So two things come to mind. So the DTC version number, we've carried that on using the pre-rec number, so that exists in the access DTC one, but it's not a rec concept, so it's not in the rec access database. And also when they merged all the data specs to create the rec data spec, some of the DTC items didn't make it into that rec data spec. So things like whether something's monetary, that's not in there at the moment. But we have, I've just raised a CP to add that back in, because for R11, which is going in June, when finding that people want to know if it's monetary, so they know whether to put a pound sign in there or not, but that the current rec data spec isn't giving that level of granularity. So I think there needs to be more alignment of the actual rec data spec itself, as well as the access databases, if you know what I mean. It's a missing data from the rec data spec that is potentially needed to be brought back in. So we need to do a wider review there as well. That's on our list, but we're just looking to address the R11 feedback first before we do that wider drill down.
But you see, the point where it gets to is, if you could generate the DTC access database from the rec data, then that point the DTC access database can become history. But until that point, we're stuck using the systems which we've generated over the last 20 years that read the DTC and work in its way.
Yes, no, I completely agree. It needs to all be in the same place to make it useful to you. At the moment, it's not.
Could potentially be something to take forward for an API. If you were to ping the API and it just returned the DTC database, so then you could ping once and it would return the entire thing, or ping a different one and it would return just DTC information. Just an idea, just a thought.
one set of comments I'd be interested to get, and I didn't catch everybody's company that they were working for, but Electrolink, I'd be interested to get their feedback on these proposals as well, because obviously they route the traffic and are a consumer of this information, a key consumer.
So we have a monthly catch up with Electrolink where we discuss what's coming up data spec wise and other areas that overlap. So yeah, we certainly can talk to them about their thoughts on this as well, and potential for us to give it to them to test as well, so they can make sure it works over the DTN.
It's things like DTS web tools to be able to align those tools with what you're doing here. Version numbers and things like that.
Very good point. I'll make a note of that. I'll have a chat with him about that. Okay, so I think that was all the questions. Should we go on to next steps, unless anyone had any other feedback points they'd like to raise or any other questions for us? No?
Just out of interest, what there's obviously a perceived problem, and I think I know what it is, but what problem is we're trying to solve with this? What is it? Feedback that you've received? What's giving you the impetus to sort of look at this, or is it just something that you think is technically the right direction to move in?
I think we're continuously looking at ways to improve what we're doing. So this is one area that we're exploring and saying, could we do better for parties by offering this? So yeah, and it's getting your feedback on what you think. But if you think there's a different direction that we should be going that would make things better for you, please do let us know, because the more feedback we get, the more we can improve things. And what we're hearing is that people, certainly when the data spec first went live under REC, there was a lot of feedback about it not being as useful as it previously was pre-REC. So we've continuously tried to build on that and do better and better. But maybe the feedback is you're happy with everything that's on offer now, we don't want to do any more, or should we keep exploring other options and looking to bring about further improvements? And in theory, this could allow in the future for changes, you wouldn't have to manually implement them in your systems. You could put the API could enable them to be pushed in, so it might benefit parties that way. So yeah, it's just exploring what we can do to make things, to bring about improvements.
I think trying to drive a bit of, not necessarily innovation, but giving you the power that if you wanted to do something different, you could. And I think an API would allow that, whereas the current formats that we give it out in are very fixed to the way that they have to be read.
One thing we have to do use generating building systems that consume this data and produce the final messages is we have to perform a mapping between our system's internal data and the message structure. There'll always need to be a technical person, for want of a better phrase, to do that particular exercise. It needs a human being in there. It can't all be automated, unfortunately.
It's not necessarily saying that it's going to take everyone's jobs away. It's more just saying that it'll give an easier readable format, that you have the power over how you want to view it, instead of kind of being stuck with what's already there.
Okay.
So in terms of next steps, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss all the feedback we've received today, talk about what we do next. Would it be fair to say the feedback is probably that this API isn't something that people will be looking to make immediate use of because there's so much else going on, that it's possibly not something for now, would be my summary of the feedback from today. So what we're going to do, we'll have a chat, we'll talk about the next steps, and if we did look to progress anything, we'd raise it as a REC change proposal so that there's that visibility to all parties and there's a chance to consult and engage. And also there's a few other actions I've noted from today around making sure we better promote the digital navigator. And just while I've got everyone on the line, does everyone know about our data specification distribution list? Because I've put a few notes in the bulletin, and every time I get a help desk call, I try and ask, would you like to go onto the list? But if you're not on it, if you send an email to, or pop your name in this meeting chat, or send an email to the rec inquiries mailbox, I can add you to a distribution list that gets an email every time we release a new data spec or pre-release data spec, so you get that notification directly.
Just to add to that as well, would there be interest from people on this call if we were to do another digital navigator session? Just a walkthrough of how to use it, what it is, from the comments earlier.
It would likely be useful, but I'd never seen it before. I want to have a run through. It looks self-explanatory. It looks a lot more like what we're used to, the old Marasco type layout. I'm sure there'll be some questions, so possibly will be useful, but probably need a bit of time to consume what's already there.
Yeah, I'm sure we could get that sorted.
Thank you, everyone. It's been really helpful to get your feedback, so thank you so much for making the time to tell us what you think. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So we've not received any further questions via Slido at this point. So yeah, I think we can draw the session to a close. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We would greatly appreciate any feedback that you may have on the session. So we've set up a survey on Slido. Please feel free to submit any feedback that you may have. And yeah, thanks again, and I hope you all have a good day.